In 1973, the United States Congress passed the Clean Air Act. The act required, among other things, that all new automobiles sold in the United States meet a strict set of emissions standards by 1975. The big three American automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, declared the requirements impossible to meet. They lobbied. They asked for extensions. They told Congress and the public, in considered industry briefings, that the technology required to meet the new standards did not exist and would not exist within the timeline. In 1973, a Japanese company called Honda announced a new engine design. The engine was called the Compound Vortex Controlled Combustion Engine, the CVCC. It met the 1975 standards. It used regular gasoline with no catalytic converter, with no exotic fuel additives, and with no significant manufacturing penalty. Honda demonstrated it in a 1975 Civic. The engine passed every emissions test the Environmental Protection Agency required. The Big Three did not buy the technology. They did not license it. They did not even formally evaluate it. This is not a story about innovation. The CVCC was a clever piece of engineering, but it was not magic. Honda's engineering team had spent 5 years working on the problem, and many of the principles they used were known. This is a story about what happens inside a large organization. When an outsider arrives with a solution to a problem, the organization has publicly declared unsolvable. To understand what happened, you have to understand who Honda was in 1973. Honda was, at the time, a Japanese motorcycle company that had only entered the American automobile market a few years earlier. They sold a small car called the Civic and a slightly larger one called the Accord. Their total U.S. auto sales for 1973 were under 30,000 units. General Motors, in the same year, sold over 4.5 million cars in the United States. When Honda introduced the CVCC, they offered to license the technology to any American manufacturer at what Honda's executives described as reasonable terms. They made the offer publicly. They made it directly. They sent engineering teams to Detroit. The technology was real, the licensing was available, and the timeline was urgent. The Big Three response is, in retrospect, almost unbelievable. Lee Iacocca, then president of Ford, was directly asked in 1973 why Ford had not licensed the CVCC. Iacocca's answer, in a public interview, was that the Japanese have a little toy engine that meets some standards. We are an automobile company, not an engine company. We don't license engines from other people. This was not an isolated quote. GM executives gave similar interviews. Chrysler executives gave similar interviews. The position was consistent. The Big Three were not going to license a Japanese engine, even if it solved their entire emissions problem. There were several reasons for this position, and they are worth examining carefully, because the same reasoning still appears, today, in industries other than automobiles. The first reason was institutional pride. The Big Three had thousands of engineers. They had decades of engine design experience. They had spent generations telling the public that they were the best automobile manufacturers in the world. Admitting that a small Japanese motorcycle company had solved a problem they could not solve would have been organizationally humiliating. It would have undermined the credibility of every senior engineer in Detroit. The second reason was financial structure. Licensing a Japanese engine would have meant paying royalties to a foreign company on every American car sold. The Big Three's economic model assumed that they would design and build their own engines, and that the profit from engine manufacturing was theirs to keep. Paying royalties would have reduced their margins. The license fee Honda was asking for was, by all accounts, modest. The principle of paying any royalty at all was the problem. The third reason was that the Big Three had a different solution in mind. They believed they could meet the 1975 standards through a different approach, the catalytic converter. The catalytic converter was an exhaust treatment device, mounted on the tailpipe, that converted harmful emissions into less harmful ones. It was something the Big Three could manufacture themselves, control fully, and bolt onto their existing engine designs without redesigning the engines. The catalytic converter approach had two important properties. The first was that it required leaded gasoline to be phased out because lead poisoned the catalyst. The second was that it added cost to every vehicle, both in the device itself and in the higher-grade fuel it required. The Big Three lobbied successfully for the catalytic converter approach to become the de facto U.S. standard. They got the EPA to define emission standards in ways that effectively required catalytic converters. They got their suppliers to scale up catalyst manufacturing. They got their customers to accept higher fuel prices and higher vehicle costs. The CVCC, which would have made all of this unnecessary, was treated as a footnote. Honda was free to sell its CVCC-equipped Civics in the United States, but the technology was confined to Honda's own vehicles. The Big Three never licensed it. They never adopted it. They built catalytic converters instead. Honda, meanwhile, used the next 20 years. Between 1975 and 1995, Honda's U.S. car sales grew from 30,000 units a year to over 1 million. Honda built its first American manufacturing plant in 1982. Honda's reputation for engineering quality, fuel efficiency, and reliability became the standard the entire industry was eventually measured against. Honda became the third largest auto seller in the United States, behind only GM and Ford. By the time the Big Three woke up to the threat, Honda was not a small Japanese motorcycle company anymore. Honda was the company that had been quietly out-engineering them for 2 decades, while they had been pretending that their pride was more valuable than their market share. The CVCC engine itself was eventually phased out by Honda in the late 1980s. Honda moved on to other engine designs. But the strategic lesson Honda took from the CVCC episode shaped the company for decades. Honda understood by 1975 that the American auto industry was not going to compete on engineering. The American auto industry was going to compete on volume, scale, and political influence. Honda decided to compete on engineering anyway. Over the next 30 years, they slowly took over the segments of the American auto market where engineering quality actually mattered to customers. There is a lesson here that goes well beyond cars. When an established industry collectively declares a problem unsolvable, the declaration is rarely about the problem. It is about the cost of admitting that the industry has not solved it. The first company that solves the problem, especially if it is an outsider, will be treated as if it does not exist. The industry will not adopt the solution. The industry will instead find a different, often worse approach that preserves the industry's existing structure. This is exactly what happened with electric cars between 2000 and 2015. Tesla solved a problem the established industry had declared unsolvable. The established industry's response was identical to what Iacocca said about the CVCC in 1973. They are not real cars. They are toys. We are automobile companies, not battery companies. We will get there in our own way. It is happening now in other industries. Whenever you see a large incumbent dismissing a smaller competitor's product as a toy, ask whether the product solves a problem the incumbent has publicly declared unsolvable. If it does, the incumbent is not telling the truth about why they have not adopted it. They are protecting their pride, their financial structure, or their political influence. They are not, in any meaningful sense, evaluating the product. The Big Three of Detroit had every advantage in 1973: capital, scale, distribution, brand. They lost most of those advantages slowly over the next 30 years to a Japanese motorcycle company that offered them a solution they refused to license. They are still recovering. They may not recover. If you found this interesting, subscribe. We go deep on the structural reasons established industries refuse to adopt outsider solutions. Drop your requests in the comments. Thanks for watching.